Stay away from toxic people before they drain your energy. You wake up tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. It is deeper than that. A weight that does not sit in your body, but in your mind. It follows you into conversations, into rooms, into moments that should feel simple but somehow feel heavy. And the most unsettling part is that nothing obvious is wrong. There is no crisis, no clear reason. Just a quiet, constant drain that never fully goes away. At first, you ignore it. You tell yourself it is just stress. Maybe you need rest, maybe you need more discipline, so you try to fix it the way everyone suggests. You sleep more, you plan better, you push harder, but nothing really changes. Because the problem is not how much you are doing. The problem is what is being taken from you. Think carefully about this. Energy is not only spent on effort, it is spent on exposure. Every interaction you have leaves a trace. Every conversation either builds you or slowly wears you down. And most of the time this happens in ways so subtle that you never question it. Some people do not enter your life with chaos. They do not announce themselves as problems. They come in quietly. They blend into your routine. They talk like everyone else. They laugh at the same things. They stand beside you without raising any alarms. And yet, after being around them, something inside you shifts. Your clarity fades just a little. Your motivation weakens just enough. Your peace becomes harder to access. This is how energy is drained without being noticed. Not through one big moment, but through small, repeated exposures. A tone, a comment, a pattern. Over time, these small moments stack, and what felt insignificant in isolation becomes overwhelming in accumulation. The danger is not intensity. The danger is repetition. Because repetition reshapes how you think. It influences how you see yourself. It alters how you respond to life. And if you are not paying attention, you begin adapting to an environment that is quietly working against you. Now ask yourself something simple, but uncomfortable. When was the last time you felt completely at ease, without tension, without overthinking, without that subtle weight in your chest? And more importantly, who was around you in that moment? There is always a connection. The truth most people avoid is that not everyone in your life is neutral. Some people contribute, others consume. And the most dangerous ones are those who do it without being obvious, without conflict, without confrontation. You do not notice the shift immediately. You just feel slightly off, then a little more, then a little more, until one day you no longer feel like yourself and you cannot explain why. This is where awareness begins. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot ignore it anymore. And once you understand where your energy is going, you stop trying to fix symptoms and start addressing the source. What you are about to understand is not about judging others. It is about protecting what allows you to function, think clearly, and move forward. Because if you do not become aware of what is draining you, you will keep trying to fix a version of yourself that was never the problem. The exhaustion, without a name. There is a type of exhaustion that confuses even the most disciplined people. You go through your day. You complete what needs to be done. You show up. You respond. You function. From the outside, everything seems normal. But internally, something feels off. Your energy is low, but not in a physical way. Your mind feels heavy. Your patience is thinner. Your motivation fades faster than it should. And the worst part is that you cannot point to a clear cause. This is where doubt begins. You start questioning yourself. You wonder if you are losing focus, if you are becoming lazy, if something is wrong with your mindset. So you try to correct it. You push yourself harder. You try to be more positive. You try to stay productive. But no matter what you do, that underlying fatigue remains. Because this kind of exhaustion is not created by effort. It is created by exposure. It comes from being around people who subtly shift your internal state, not in dramatic ways, but in small, almost invisible moments. A conversation that leaves you slightly tense. A reaction that makes you second-guess yourself. a presence that you cannot fully relax around, even if you cannot explain why. Individually, these moments seem insignificant, easy to ignore, easy to justify, but your mind does not ignore them. Your system registers everything, every slight discomfort, every subtle pressure, every unspoken tension, and over time, these small inputs accumulate. Your clarity begins to fade. Decisions feel heavier. Simple tasks require more effort. You hesitate more. You overthink more. You feel less like yourself, but you cannot explain when the shift happened. This is the cost of prolonged exposure to the wrong environment. As described in the Reflections of Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, Book 2, Paragraph 1, the mind is shaped by what it repeatedly encounters. Not occasionally, but consistently. What surrounds you becomes part of you, whether you are aware of it or not. And this is where most people make a critical mistake. They try to repair their energy without examining what is draining it. They focus on discipline, routines, habits, but ignore the influence of the people they interact with every day. You cannot recover your energy while staying in the same conditions that are depleting it. At some point, you have to stop asking what is wrong with you and start asking what you are being exposed to on a daily basis. Because the real issue is not your capacity. It is what is quietly consuming it. The disguise of normality. At some point, what drains you stops feeling unusual. It becomes part of your routine. The tension you feel around certain people no longer stands out because it happens too often. You adapt. You adjust your reactions. You filter what you say. You prepare yourself before interactions without even realizing it. And slowly, what should feel wrong starts to feel normal. This is how toxic dynamics survive. Not through intensity, but through familiarity. You begin to justify behaviors that once would have bothered you. You tell yourself that is just how they are. You convince yourself that every relationship has friction. You lower your expectations for how you should feel around others. And without noticing, you shift your internal standards. The problem is not that you accept reality. The problem is that you stop questioning it. When something is repeated enough times, your mind stops treating it as a threat. It categorizes it as predictable, manageable, expected. But predictable does not mean harmless. It only means you have adapted to it. You start anticipating reactions before they happen. You choose your words more carefully. You avoid certain topics. You control your tone. You adjust your energy to prevent conflict, even when no conflict has been declared. And all of this consumes energy. Not in a visible way, but in a constant underlying effort to maintain balance in an environment that subtly disrupts you. Over time, this becomes exhausting, not because of one moment, but because of the continuous need to regulate yourself. You are no longer just existing, you are managing, and the most dangerous part is that you stop recognizing this as a problem. This is where clarity fades. Because when discomfort becomes familiar, you stop identifying it as discomfort. You start calling it normal. And once something is labeled as normal, you stop trying to change it. As reflected in the teachings of Epictetus Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 2, people do not suffer from situations alone, but from their acceptance of what they believe those situations represent. When you accept something as normal, you stop resisting it, even if it is quietly working against you. This is how your standards are lowered without your consent. You begin to tolerate what once drained you. You begin to excuse what once affected you. You begin to stay in environments that require you to constantly adjust who you are, just to maintain stability. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to recognize the original version of yourself that did not need to do any of this. The question is no longer whether something is draining you. The question is whether you have become so used to it that you no longer notice. Because once something feels normal, it becomes invisible. And what is invisible is rarely challenged. Microdoses of negativity. Not all damage comes from obvious conflict. In fact, the most effective form of emotional drain rarely announces itself. It comes in small, controlled amounts. Comments that seem harmless. Reactions that feel slightly off. Subtle shifts in tone that you notice but choose to ignore. None of it is strong enough to confront. None of it feels big enough to justify distance, but all of it leaves a mark. This is how negativity operates when it wants to stay undetected. It does not overwhelm you at once. It conditions you over time. A small remark that plants doubt, a quiet dismissal of your ideas, a sarcastic tone that makes you question your confidence, a passive reaction that makes you feel like you are asking for too much. Each moment passes quickly, but your mind does not discard it. It stores it. It replays it. It adjusts to it. And the accumulation begins. You do not notice the change immediately. You just feel slightly less certain, slightly less expressive, slightly more cautious. You hesitate before speaking. You rethink things you once said with confidence. You begin to edit yourself in real time, not because you want to, but because something in your environment trained you to. This is the effect of repetition. Negativity delivered in small doses bypasses your defense mechanisms. It does not trigger confrontation because it never crosses a clear line. Instead, it slowly redefines where that line is. What once felt unacceptable starts to feel tolerable. What once felt uncomfortable starts to feel expected. And without realizing it, you adapt. You start adjusting your energy to match the environment. You lower your tone. You reduce your enthusiasm. You become more contained, more controlled, more careful. Not because you decided to change, but because you were influenced to. As described in the reflections of Seneca in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 7, the mind absorbs the qualities of those it spends time with, even when it resists consciously. Exposure shapes behavior, not through force, but through proximity. This is why small moments matter more than people think, because they are repeated. And repetition creates patterns. Patterns create identity shifts. And identity shifts determine how you show up in your own life. At some point, you are no longer reacting to a person. You are reacting to a pattern that has been reinforced over time. And that pattern begins to feel like part of you, but it is not. It was introduced gradually, accepted unconsciously, reinforced consistently. The real danger is not what is said once. It is what is said repeatedly, just subtle enough for you to ignore, but consistent enough to reshape you. And if you do not interrupt this process, you will continue changing in ways that do not reflect who you truly are. The question is not whether negativity exists in your environment. The question is, how much of it you have been absorbing without realizing it. The erosion of mental clarity. At first, it feels like distraction. You lose focus more easily. Your thoughts take longer to organize. Decisions that once felt simple start to feel heavier, almost like your mind is working against you instead of with you. You assume it is fatigue, maybe stress, maybe too many responsibilities. But there is something deeper happening. Your clarity is not disappearing on its own. It is being disrupted. When you are constantly exposed to subtle tension, your mind shifts into a state of low-level alert. You start scanning reactions, interpreting tones, anticipating responses. Even when nothing is happening, part of your attention is occupied. And attention is not unlimited. The more of it you spend managing your environment, the less of it you have available to think clearly. You begin second-guessing yourself, not because you lack intelligence, but because your internal signal is being interfered with. What once felt obvious now feels uncertain. What once felt intuitive now requires analysis. You hesitate more. You replay conversations. You question decisions that, in a different environment, you would have made without effort. This is not overthinking. This is cognitive interference. Your mind is trying to process too many external inputs that should not be there in the first place. Over time, this creates a form of mental noise, a constant background activity that never fully turns off. Even in silence, your thoughts are not quiet. They are occupied. You are not just thinking about what matters, you are filtering what does not. And that process drains you. As reflected in the teachings of Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, Book 6, paragraph 11, the mind should remain clear and undisturbed, not pulled in multiple directions by external influences. But clarity requires space. And space cannot exist when your attention is constantly divided. This is where the real damage happens. You start losing trust in your own perception. You rely more on external validation. You wait for reactions before forming conclusions. You adjust your thinking based on how others might respond, rather than what you actually believe. And without noticing, your mental independence begins to weaken. You are no longer thinking freely. You are thinking conditionally. The longer this continues, the more difficult it becomes to return to a clear, grounded state. Not because you are incapable, but because you have been operating in an environment that continuously disrupts your internal balance. Clarity is not something you force. It is something you protect. And if your environment is filled with subtle pressure, hidden tension, and constant emotional undercurrents, your mind will reflect that, whether you want it to or not. The question is no longer why your thoughts feel scattered. The question is, what is constantly interfering with them? Because once you remove the interference, clarity does not need to be rebuilt. It returns on its own. The addiction to draining relationships. There is a point where something that exhausts you starts to feel familiar, and what is familiar becomes difficult to leave, even when it is clearly costing you. This is where confusion turns into attachment. You do not stay because it feels good. You stay because it feels known. Draining relationships often create a cycle that alternates between tension and relief. One moment you feel dismissed, misunderstood, or subtly diminished. The next moment, things seem fine again. There is a conversation, a laugh, a small sign of connection. And that brief return to normal feels like progress. But it is not progress. It is reinforcement. Your mind starts associating relief with the same source that caused the discomfort, and that creates a loop. You endure the tension, waiting for the moment it improves. And when it does, even slightly, it feels rewarding. Not because it is healthy, but because it breaks the discomfort. This pattern conditions you. You begin to tolerate more than you should, because part of you is focused on the moments where things feel better. You hold on to those moments as proof that the relationship is worth maintaining. You tell yourself it is not always bad. You focus on exceptions instead of patterns, and this is how attachment forms around instability. As reflected in the writings of Seneca in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 104, what harms us most is not always what is consistently painful, but what keeps us uncertain, alternating between ease and discomfort. The instability keeps you engaged because your mind is trying to resolve it. You start investing more energy, not less. You try to improve communication. You try to adjust your behavior. You try to understand the other person better. But the more you invest, the harder it becomes to step back, because stepping back feels like losing something you work to maintain. This is where many people get trapped, not because they cannot see the problem, but because they are emotionally tied to the cycle. They are not attached to the person as much as they are attached to the pattern, and the pattern is what keeps them there. You begin to confuse emotional intensity with meaning. You believe that because something affects you deeply, it must be important. But intensity is not the same as value. Sometimes intensity is just instability repeated often enough to feel significant. Over time, this drains your ability to recognize what a stable, healthy interaction feels like. Calm starts to feel unfamiliar. Simplicity feels empty, and you return to what is unpredictable, because that is what your system has adapted to. This is not connection. This is conditioning. The longer you stay in this cycle, the more your standards shift. You accept less consistency, less respect, less clarity, and you justify it, because part of you is still waiting for the next moment of relief. But relief is not the same as peace. Relief only exists because something was wrong to begin with. Peace does not require recovery. The question you need to ask is not whether there are good moments. The question is whether those moments only exist to compensate for everything that drains you. Because if they do, then you are not in a relationship that gives. You are in a cycle that keeps taking, while giving you just enough to stay. The illusion of emotional responsibility. Many people carry a burden that is not theirs to bear. They feel responsible for the moods, the happiness, and the behavior of those around them. They believe that if someone is upset, it is their duty to fix it. If someone is distant, it is their responsibility to reach out. If someone criticizes, it is their job to soothe the discomfort. And at first, it feels noble. It feels like caring. It feels like loyalty. But the truth is, this is an illusion. You are not responsible for another person's emotional state. You are not obligated to absorb negativity or compensate for instability. Attempting to do so only creates a deeper drain on your own energy. Every time you intervene to manage someone else's reactions, you are redirecting energy that belongs to you. Every time you suppress your instincts to prevent conflict, you are weakening your connection with yourself. This sense of duty often disguises itself as love, friendship, or loyalty. You tell yourself that you are helping. You tell yourself that you are being a good person, but beneath it lies exhaustion, resentment, and a slow erosion of your sense of self. You begin to live according to the emotional patterns of others, rather than your own principles. Epictetus reminds us in the Discourses, Book 4, Chapter 1, that our concern should be with what is within our control, and not with the whims, desires, or moods of others. The mind cannot remain strong when it is constantly bending to serve forces outside of its jurisdiction. Energy devoted to controlling the uncontrollable is energy lost. Every time you take responsibility for someone else's feelings, you are giving away your clarity, your focus, and your inner balance. And the more you give, the more is expected. Boundaries start to feel selfish, even when they are essential. Saying no feels wrong, even when it is the only way to preserve your own well-being. The illusion of responsibility also creates guilt. You feel bad for stepping back. You feel bad for prioritizing yourself. You feel like you are failing someone who depends on you. But this guilt is a trap. It is designed by your mind to keep you investing in something that is not yours to maintain. Understanding this is liberating. You do not have to fix everyone. You do not have to explain yourself. You do not have to absorb every tension, every irritation, every expectation that is not yours to carry. Your responsibility is to yourself first, to your clarity, your energy, your peace. Only when you are grounded and whole can you truly decide how to engage with others without being consumed by them. The question is no longer about helping. The question is about choosing wisely where your energy goes. The internal noise that wasn't yours. You start noticing thoughts that feel like they belong to you, but they do not. Doubts, insecurities, fears. Suddenly, they occupy your mind as if they are your own creation. You replay conversations you never intended to overanalyze. You second-guess decisions that were once obvious. You feel tension in your chest without understanding why. And slowly, you start believing these thoughts are your reality. But they are not. They are echoes. Fragments absorbed from people who have been in your life too long, who influence your mind without permission. You take on their criticism, their cynicism, their constant questioning of everything, and it becomes internalized. You are no longer processing events solely through your own perception. You are filtering through layers of someone else's unresolved issues, biases, and insecurities. The danger is subtle. You do not recognize that your mind is cluttered with external noise. You assume all these doubts and anxieties were always there, part of you. You try to solve them internally, but they are not problems you created. They are intrusions disguised as internal thoughts. This is why clarity feels impossible. You are constantly trying to untangle what belongs to you from what belongs to others. You feel responsible for fixing thoughts that are not yours. You try to control reactions that are not rooted in your own experience. And in the process, you lose touch with your natural reasoning and your instinctive sense of peace. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, letter 81, that the mind must remain sovereign, uncorrupted by external pressures that are not under its control. When you allow someone else's negativity to occupy your inner space, you are surrendering sovereignty. You are letting external chaos dictate internal equilibrium. The longer you live this way, the more your identity shifts. Decisions are influenced not by your logic but by the echo of others' expectations. Your confidence diminishes. Your clarity disappears. Your sense of self becomes fragmented. You are not broken. You are infiltrated. Recognizing the noise is the first step. Understanding that these thoughts are not yours allows you to reclaim your mind. It allows you to separate the internal signal from the external interference. And when you start protecting the space where your mind operates freely, the fog begins to lift. The real question is not why you feel drained or anxious. The question is, whose voices have you been carrying inside your head as if they were your own? The gradual loss of identity. When you constantly adjust yourself to accommodate others, you begin to lose track of who you are. It does not happen overnight. There is no dramatic moment when you suddenly feel different. It is a slow process, almost imperceptible at first. You start censoring your words, changing your tone, holding back opinions. You adapt to moods, reactions, and expectations that were never yours to manage. At first, it feels practical. You tell yourself you are being considerate. You are keeping the peace. You are maintaining relationships. But the cost is hidden. Every time you suppress a part of yourself, a fragment of your authentic identity slips away. Over time, these small compromises accumulate into a version of you that exists primarily to accommodate others, rather than reflect who you truly are. Your choices start to reflect the patterns you have adapted to, not your own priorities. Your reactions become conditioned responses. Your preferences and desires become secondary. Even your passions feel muted because they clash with the expectations of those around you. You begin to confuse adaptation with compromise, and compromise with selflessness. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 5, paragraph 16, that it is the nature of the mind to conform to the company it keeps unless it consciously asserts its own principles. If you do not protect the space where your identity can thrive, you risk molding yourself entirely to external influence. This erosion of identity is often accompanied by guilt. You feel selfish for asserting yourself. You feel wrong for wanting something different from what others expect. You believe that your needs are less important than maintaining harmony. And slowly, you prioritize everything else over yourself. The danger is subtle, but profound. One day, you look in the mirror and wonder if the person staring back is really you or just a reflection shaped by everyone else's expectations. You feel disconnected from your own desires, your instincts, and even your thoughts. You start questioning decisions you would have once made without hesitation. The question is not whether you have lost your identity entirely. The question is how much of yourself you have allowed to be shaped by forces outside your control, and how much remains untouched. Reclaiming identity is not dramatic. It is quiet. It begins with awareness. It begins with noticing where you have compromised. It begins with asserting the right to exist as yourself without apology. The invisible cost of tolerance is often praised as a virtue, a sign of strength, patience, and maturity. You are told that enduring discomfort gracefully demonstrates character. And to some extent, that is true. But there is a line few people acknowledge, the line where tolerance becomes silent depletion. When what you endure consistently drains your energy, patience is no longer virtuous. It is costly. The danger is invisible because you cannot measure the energy you lose moment by moment. You adapt. You excuse. You forgive in ways that protect relationships but damage your inner balance. You convince yourself that it is worth it. You remind yourself that people have flaws, that conflicts are natural, that life is complicated. And slowly, the effort of tolerating becomes heavier than the initial conflict ever was. Every compromise, every adjustment, every suppressed reaction carries a weight. It accumulates in your mind and body without announcement. It steals mental clarity, reduces emotional resilience, and reshapes your perception of what is acceptable. What once felt intolerable begins to feel manageable, but at the cost of your standards. You are recalibrating your boundaries without realizing it. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, letter 82, that endurance is valuable only when it serves reason and self-respect. Enduring beyond that out of fear, obligation, or guilt is not strength, it is surrender. You begin to tolerate not because it aligns with your principles, but because the alternative, the confrontation, the assertion, the withdrawal, feels uncomfortable. Over time, tolerance without discernment erodes your sense of self. You lose track of what you should accept and what you should resist. You confuse patience with compliance. You confuse endurance with loyalty. You begin to question whether your discomfort is justified, convincing yourself that it is your fault for feeling drained. The invisible cost of tolerance is the gradual surrender of your energy, clarity, and autonomy. It is a quiet theft, masked as virtue. And because it is subtle, it often goes unnoticed until you are deeply depleted. The question is no longer whether you can tolerate more. The question is whether what you tolerate is actually worth the price it extracts from your mind, your focus, and your life. The power of reclaiming your attention. Your energy follows your attention. Where you focus, your strength flows. This principle is simple, but few truly apply it. You are constantly deciding, consciously or not, who and what occupies your mental space. Every thought, every conversation, every interaction draws a portion of your focus, and not all of it is worth your investment. Many people allow their attention to be hijacked by those who drain them. They respond immediately to texts, comments, or opinions that stir anxiety or frustration. They replay past interactions that left them unsettled. They anticipate conflicts that may never occur. Each act of giving attention to what is unnecessary or harmful diminishes the energy available for what actually matters: clarity, growth, and peace of mind. Reclaiming attention means becoming selective. It means observing where your focus naturally goes and asking whether it serves you or weakens you. It is not avoidance. It is strategic. It is the act of deciding that some influences will no longer be granted access to your internal life. Marcus Aurelius teaches in Meditations, Book 8, paragraph 36, that the mind must be directed toward what is within its control. What you choose to think about, to dwell on, to revisit, is entirely under your jurisdiction. Allowing external disturbances to dominate your attention is a voluntary surrender. Protecting your focus is an act of sovereignty. When you reclaim your attention, subtle changes occur. You stop reacting reflexively. You stop giving energy to what diminishes you. You begin to operate with intention, choosing how your thoughts and actions are influenced. Your clarity returns. Your peace grows. Your decisions become aligned with your values rather than the demands of others. This is the foundation of resilience. Energy is finite, and attention is the vehicle that distributes it. By controlling where it flows, you stop feeding patterns of toxicity, overthinking, and self-doubt. You no longer expend mental resources on what does not belong to your growth. The question is no longer how to protect your energy. The question is where you allow your attention to go, because where your attention flows, your life will follow. The courage to break the pattern. Recognizing the drain is one thing. Acting on it is another entirely. Most people notice the cycle of depletion but hesitate to disrupt it. The thought of conflict, discomfort, or disapproval keeps them trapped. The fear of being labeled selfish or unkind outweighs the urgency of protecting their own energy. But staying in the pattern is what slowly erodes who you are. Breaking the pattern requires courage, not dramatics. It is a quiet decision to act differently, to no longer comply with cycles that harm you. It is the refusal to adjust your life constantly for the comfort of others when it comes at the expense of your clarity, peace, or identity. It is the realization that self-preservation is not selfish. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 21, that virtue consists in living according to reason and in accordance with one's own principles, even when the majority resist or disapprove. To break the pattern, you must accept that discomfort is part of the process. It will feel strange at first. You may encounter resistance, questioning, or misunderstanding. But this is the cost of reclaiming autonomy. Courage in this context is not about confrontation. It is about consistency. It is about choosing each day not to give away more energy than necessary. It is about recognizing when to engage, when to step back, and when to say nothing at all, because your peace is worth more than the approval of those who drain you. The longer you delay, the more entrenched the cycle becomes. Patterns strengthen with repetition. The more you accommodate without action, the more your mind internalizes the drain as normal, and the harder it becomes to return to your true rhythm. Acting requires clarity, awareness, and courage. It is the act of disrupting automatic responses that no longer serve you. It is the act of reclaiming your life from habits that were formed unconsciously. The question is no longer whether you have observed the drain. The question is whether you have the courage to step out of the pattern and act in accordance with your own principles, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. The silence that restores your energy. True restoration does not come from external validation, confrontation, or attempts to change others. It comes from silence, from the deliberate act of choosing who and what occupies your mental and emotional space. When you stop feeding the voices, opinions, and behaviors that drain you, you create room for clarity, peace, and strength to return. Silence is not emptiness. It is an active boundary. It is the decision to disengage from patterns that are harmful and unnecessary. In this space, you reconnect with your own thoughts, your instincts, and your values. You begin to notice what truly matters, free from the interference of external pressures. Every moment of calm, every quiet reflection, is a deposit of energy back into your system. Marcus Aurelius reminds us in Meditations, Book 4, Paragraph 3, that the mind must be maintained as a fortress, undisturbed by the opinions and behaviors of others. Peace is not granted by the world. It is cultivated internally through discipline, attention, and the conscious removal of distraction. The silence you create is the vessel in which your energy regenerates. When you prioritize this silence, you also cultivate discernment. You learn who deserves access to your attention and who does not. You no longer expend energy reacting to every minor disturbance. You no longer carry the burdens that are not yours to carry. Your responses become intentional rather than reflexive. Your mind regains the sovereignty that was slowly eroded by exposure to others' patterns. This restoration is transformative. It is not temporary relief, but a fundamental recalibration of how you engage with the world. Your focus sharpens, your decisions gain clarity, and your emotional resilience grows. You stop reacting to the drain and start investing in the flow of your own energy. The question is no longer how to endure. The question is how to protect the quiet spaces that allow you to thrive. Peace does not come from changing others. It comes from choosing carefully who has access to your mind and how you allow your energy to be spent.